Welcome to Rewired4Gr8 Success with Dr. Amy Sanchez, neuropsychologist, executive coach, organizational development expert, award-winning best-selling author, and international speaker. Dr. Sanchez is on a mission to impact 1 million leaders through her thought leadership and specialized programs for women leaders. She is passionate about helping organizations strategize and draw a direct connection between leadership, diversity and inclusion, and organizational outcomes. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sanchez, and I'm your host for today's episode of Leading with Great Impact. This series, we're going to be talking with Amy Sanchez, MBA executive coach and corporate trainer. Now, in this jam-packed episode, we're going to be talking about a number of issues, so I'll warn you, get your notepad. But these are going to be issues that impact upon women specifically that are seeking to advance in their careers. So I want to say welcome, Amy. I'm so honored to have you on today.
Thank you, Ame, my name doppelganger.
I know. So, okay, I'll tell you guys more about that later. Okay, so I just want to begin by sharing a little bit with my listeners about you, Amy. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So for you folks that are listening, she has such an impressive career and an amazing testimony to the power of perseverance. Amy spent 13 years of her career in healthcare, sales, and marketing. She also obtained an MBA as she was going along that pathway. But after the birth of her first child, she decided to shift gears and she earned a coaching certification and founded her own company called Swim Against the Current. So today, Amy partners with corporate leaders to help them replace stress and overwhelm with ease and joy so that they can exceed their goals while enjoying life. I love that. And she does this via her career by offering leadership coaching and doing workshops. So now here's the story. Amy and I initially met because she reached out to me as another woman who was leading in a respective industry, but also because, as fate would have it, our names are very similar. She's Amy, as you can hear, A-M-Y, and I am Ame, A-I-M-E-E, but we're both Sanchez's. Yes. And we also live in the same state. Yes. Yes. And we do very similar work. Yes. So it was just too much of a coincidence. So we
were bound to meet.
Yeah, I know. We quickly became friends and sisters. And so Amy and I are going to do this episode, this episode, because we just thought it would be fun to chat it up. So I just want to thank you again for being here, and I'm going to jump in. So I'm going to do this segment a little differently. I'm going to call it Ask an Expert. I mean, how often do you get two executive coaches on the same call talking about issues that are unique to your experience as a woman leader? So I think this is going to be cool.
I do too. So much need for this. And it's a topic I think I coach every day with my clients.
So good. Okay. So I get women asking me all the time, how can I make sure that my opinion is heard and that I feel respected and that they respect me? So what would you say about that?
So I would say those are two different things.
Okay.
First of all, so making sure that your opinion is heard. So as a coach, I always am really curious about what the undercurrent is behind the question, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't you feel heard? Is it the message that you're receiving in return? Is it that they are not giving you appropriate recognition? So what are the layers beneath I am not being heard? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing that I'd ask. Now, side note, I have been a woman in corporate America, and particularly when you're in a room full of men whose voices are loud and their personalities tend to be dominant, sometimes you have to mirror that sort of presence in order to feel like you are heard. So two different things, right? Is I get it, I understand it. It definitely happens, no doubt about it, probably too often than it should. But I also wonder, what are the messages we're either telling ourselves, or what are we observing in the room as we think about how do I make sure that I'm heard?
Mm.
So the other thing I think you said around respect.
Yes.
Okay. So heard and respected, those two kind of go hand in hand. So oftentimes what I find is, and as it relates to imposter syndrome in particular, because we spend so much time in our career, and as type A, a lot of us are type A women, high achievers, we tend to tie up a lot of our worth in our career and the outcomes that we see in our career. So another area that is just really, really deep and rich in order to peel away the onion to understand, why are you seeking that type of validation? Certainly it feels good to feel fulfilled. Number one reason why people leave their jobs is because they don't feel recognized and they don't feel valued. So there's definitely merit to that. But there's also a mindset there that is helpful to really understand. And so what the solution is for you.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I talk to my clients about kind of operating from the 60-40 principle, right? Where there's 40% of things happening that you maybe cannot control. Like maybe there's things like intersectionality, gender bias, unconscious bias. There's all the biases, right? Everything that's happening, or the fact that you maybe are the only woman on a leadership team. These are things you can't control. Sometimes they're not going to change. But that 60%, that's all you. That is your responsibility to show up impeccable, hitting your A game every time. And then the rest of it is strategy. So I believe that even though some of those situations are not going to change or they're very fixed, that there's often ways that you can navigate around some of those obstacles. What do you think?
I think that's a really, really great observation. Yes. And what I love about that too, Ame, is, sometimes you just can't change the jerk that you work with. And so the key is to not letting that person get to you in such a way that it's going to impact your performance or the way you think about yourself. So that's a great insight.
I like that you said that, where you don't let it impact your performance. I was talking to someone else about that, and the issue was that very thing, that it was happening maybe exactly the way you thought it was happening for the reason you thought it was happening. But then this person began internalizing that feeling of this isn't going to change, the lack of motivation to do anything different because it's not going to change. And it turned into bitterness and resentment and anger. And so then it started impacting upon performance. And now you're in this situation where you may be hyper visible because maybe you're the only woman, or maybe you're one of few, or maybe you're the only person of color or from your diverse background, or whatever the case may be. There's that hyper visibility that exists anyway. And now you've got performance problems on top of it. So then the interaction and the exchange changes, even though it came from your initial response that this is unjust or this shouldn't be happening. And so I think it's really important to kind of reel that back in before it runs away with you. And like you're saying, understand what the undercurrent is. And I think that can happen when people are more eager to seek out solutions rather than focus on the problem.
Yes. I think that's there's so much rich territory there. And I'm actually thinking of a close friend of mine who works for a large company. She's been there for 20 years, so she's well respected. She's gotten a number of awards along the way. She works for a boss who, in many ways, over the last 2 years of reporting to him, there have been specific situations where she has felt undermined as a woman. He's highlighted specifically how she looks, what she's wearing, things you would never say to a man. And also has undermined her as a woman of color. And these have been really, really clear examples, not just, I'm not sure, maybe this is why I'm feeling this way. I mean, it's cut and dry. In that situation, when it's so egregious, right? The experience that you're dealing with is so egregious, you should sort of run it up the flagpole and figure out how you can get it fixed, because it's just not right, particularly with a large national company like this, where especially, you know, we're all talking about diversity and being fair. She's run it up the flagpole and nothing has happened. So of course, to your point, now she's starting to internalize it. She's starting to deal with feelings of self-doubt. It's impacting her mental health, and, you know, understandably. So there's two distinctions there. It's right. It's like, trust your gut. If you feel like somebody is treating you unfairly, there's probably a nugget of truth to that, but, you know, dig into that and really make sure that what you're observing is what you're interpreting from what you're observing is accurate. And then the second thing is, you know, you either decide if you're going to stick with it and try to change the situation, change the way that you feel about the situation, or leave.
Yeah, I think self-awareness is so important in the whole process too, because the more aware you are, the more clarity you have, and then you start to be able to kind of drill in on some of the things that really aren't you, but maybe situational factors.
Yes, yes.
So speaking of that, I kind of want to segue into this next thing. Okay, so look.
Okay.
A lot of people talk about imposter syndrome. Now, for me as a psychologist, I don't know, maybe I'm just one of the few. That wasn't a term that I used with people that I work with. It wasn't something that was regular language for me. But when I started working in the organizational space with people that are leaders and people working in the organizational realm, especially women leaders, then that term started popping up. And believe it or not, there's a lot of confirmation people have brought in dealing with that term when I talk with them about it. So I want to ask you about imposter syndrome, because there still may be people out there, I may not be the only one, that didn't know what imposter syndrome is and maybe why it exists in such a large frequency for women leaders.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I actually prepared a keynote speech about this that was supposed to be delivered the beginning of March of this year. So I have this whole PowerPoint about it that never happened because of the pandemic.
Well, now you get to use it.
And now I get to use it. But you bring up a great point, because this is a term we throw around, but what does it really mean? And how do I recognize that, that this may be something that that's getting in my way? So I'm going to get really nerdy right now and give you a definition. Imposter syndrome, the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort or skills. So I know it's a lot of words. Boiled down, people really don't believe that the success that's happened is because of their efforts.
Wow.
That it's because of something else or someone else. So so that's imposter syndrome, but it can show up in all sorts of different ways. So the one that I think we most commonly talk about is you just don't believe in yourself. But sometimes this shows up like you feel like a fraud. You constantly devalue your worth. You know, somebody says, hey, great job, you did this. And you're, oh, no, that wasn't me. That was so-and-so. And that you undermine your expertise or your experience. You're a perfectionist. This is one that's right. I know, right? This is one that we often don't think about being a product of imposter syndrome, but because we don't deep down believe that we drive success or we're the reason for it, we try to overperform, or over prepare, because we want to be successful and you know, we want to show up the right way. And micromanagers, that's the other way it shows up. Yeah.
You got me with that one.
What just came up for you? I have to ask.
The micromanage piece. I'm constantly saying I am not a micromanager. I don't like to micromanage people. However, there are certain ways that things have to be done if they're things that people are executing on my behalf or what have you. And so then it can take on somewhat of, yes, a rigid stance when you think like it's got to be done this way and blah, blah, blah. So when you hit on that micromanagement piece being a form of imposter syndrome, I think the big picture question maybe you ask yourself is, what happens if everything is not the way that you want it to be? Like, what's the worst, what's your fear? What's the worst case scenario? And then I think you get to the foundation of what is driving the behavior. So like for me, if you use my scenario, okay, so then if they mess up on this particular thing, then how is that going to make me look? Right?
Yes.
Because I'm worried about the perceptions of people, what they interpret about me. And then I internalize that.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I think you hit on the root cause. It's a great point is, you know, these things can show up and it doesn't necessarily mean it's related to imposter syndrome. It could be related to something else. You hit the nail on the head. That's when you start digging and understanding. And if it does come back to, what does this say about me? Likely there might be some imposter syndrome at play.
Kind of walk that through. So tell us more. This is good.
Yeah. So the other thing I really wanted to point out is the beginnings of learning about imposter syndrome. So this was actually discovered back in 1978 by two female psychologists. And at the time, they thought this was related to women exclusively. So from a personal standpoint, having worked with both genders and leaders in particular, and from all the research that's come since then,
yes,
this is not just women. This is
yes.
women and this is men. But I
Yes.
think what happened back then is men didn't feel comfortable enough, or women were just braver to talk about what was happening to them.
Yeah, I think so too, because I've worked with a lot of males that have experienced imposter syndrome, and it shows up differently, and sometimes we interpret it differently, but it's there. And the more that you unpack it, like deconstruct the thoughts associated with that, the more it gets clearer to you that this is what's happening. The reason I think it's important to kind of like figure out what's happening with it is because then you start talking about, okay, solutions. What can we do about it? If you know that you have a struggle with imposter syndrome, how do you deal with it? Do you have it for the rest of your life and it's something you can't fix? Or, you know, what is the prognosis regarding this condition? People might be listening and wondering, hey, I didn't know I had that. Okay, now I think I do. Now what?
Great question. The very first solution to all challenges or problems is awareness, right? So that's a real gift. Once you diagnose that, yes, this is something that I might be struggling with, or somebody I'm very close to, somebody in my orbit is struggling with this. So what do I do now? Well, congratulations. I just want to say if you have diagnosed that this is something you're struggling with, because that is a huge, huge, huge step and a step that many people don't achieve. So what do you want to what to do now that you've discovered it? Well, like you've probably caught on that, Ame and I, with our classical training, is the first thing is really to understand it, right? So I keep talking about peel back the ways of the layers of the onion, but this is so, so important, because if you just understand it at a surface level, but you don't understand what the triggers are, what the thoughts are that are firing, a lot of these are unconscious, and how it's then turning into your feelings, which then impact your behavior, it's going to be really hard to change. So if you recognize, based on this conversation, that this might be something you're suffering with, do a little bit more digging and understand what's causing you to feel that way, and what some of these unconscious thoughts are that are firing that you want to challenge.
Yeah, and I think too, if you find that it's this pervasive thing, like this is probably a little more than, oh, I think I have that. It might be like, I'm freezing when I have to give a presentation at work, or I get so in my thoughts about what I said in a meeting that I can't sleep at night because I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, what must they think about me? Or how did I sound? Or I, mill over how to send an email to my boss. Like, this is what I'm talking about, where this really starts hijacking your ability to show up as a confident leader, which ultimately hijacks your ability to, ascend and be able to rise in your career. So it's something that becomes urgent for you to resolve. And so what I would encourage you to do is, as you do that self-awareness and you dig a little deeper about where that may be coming from, is think about, how can we get to solutions? I know what the problem may be, right? The problem might be that maybe I'm not as aware of the blind spots that I have as a leader. Maybe some of the problem is I don't have as strong a self-worth as I could have, and I'm maybe not as confident. So that's why it's hard for me to accept recognition or to see my achievements. Okay, so you know what the problem is. So now focus on the solutions. How do I get help to be able to work through some of these things? Because at this point, it's going to be more than just you reading a book or watching a couple videos or doing whatever. You're going to need somebody to partner with you in the process so that you can skip over time, the time that it would take you. In some cases, it could take you years to be able to try and do this on your own. So I want to kind of shift and ask Amy, what have you seen as far as progress that has been made for people that you've helped to find solutions? And about how long do you think that it usually takes?
Great question. And yeah, I want to reiterate, having gone through this myself when I was in the corporate space, and then also working with people who are currently experiencing this, what you said has so much wisdom is it's really hard to get out of your own head and solve your own problems without somebody else helping you. Now, it doesn't have to be a coach, it can be somebody else, but don't expect your partner or your friend to help you with this. They are too tied up in your outcome.
Yes. And they're too close to it.
Yes.
Like, they'll just be like, I told you this already. You're fantastic. What's the problem?
Totally. Totally. And
now
then
get out there and do it. Just
get over yourself. It's going to be fine.
As you stand there with your shaky knees. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt.
Oh yes. So if you do in fact decide that, hey, this is something that I've that's been holding me back and I really want to proactively address it. So what I've seen with some of my clients, gosh, I'm trying to think of all the different stories. This presents in a lot of different ways. As we talked about before, how do I diagnose this? So I had somebody who came to me and had been in, and this was a man, and again, going back to this happens to both genders. He'd been in the same industry for quite some time in a sales operations role. And he leaped companies every 2 to 3 years because he felt like, oh, if I was just with a different manager, a different environment, or a different team, that things would be different. But guess what? The same thing happens every single time. Wow. So when that happens, right? There's a pattern. The one commonality is you. So as we started to work together, we started to unpack what was happening, and it turned out he was in environments that were completely misaligned with his values, and as a result, it started to mess with him. I mean, he started to really lose confidence in himself, lose confidence that he was going to find something that he really liked. So we set him on a new trajectory. He decided to completely leave the tech industry. Which for those of you who are familiar with it is a tough move because there's a lot of prestige to being in it. There's a lot of money to be made, particularly if you're in Silicon Valley. So that's a big leap. But he moved into a completely different industry, a more service-related industry where it's focused on helping people, and he loves it. And all those doubts that he had before are gone, and he feels empowered. And so that's the magic that can really happen as you start to unpack some of these roadblocks you keep running into and make some actionable changes.
Yes. Another thing, one of the exercises that I kind of walk my clients through is backstory. I was working with a female client that was having this issue of imposter syndrome, kind of hijacking her at the most inopportune times at work when she's giving a presentation or having to stand up in a meeting or be visible. That was the gist. And so what we started walking through, like I said, that deconstructing of that thought process. What is your fear? What is the worst case scenario? What is the thing you think could happen when you're standing in front of these people that creates the fear that I can't do this? I'm not your person. And for her, it was, what if somebody asks the question I can't answer? It was that simple, but it was creating this complex thought process and these behaviors and these avoidant behaviors where she would avoid going to meetings, avoid speaking up. She'd sit in the back of the room, just avoid being called on. All these complex behaviors related to this simple thing. So once we were able to kind of ascertain what was the trigger, then we started creating solutions and giving her strategies to be able to cope with that, such as scripting, things that she could do, use, or say in the moment that would buy her some time to either think or provide another solution that would buy her some time outside of the meeting. We talked about having her prep before she went in, preparing for those questions she thought could pop up. And it took this element of surprise out of the situation that just totally reduced the fear. So that was just a small snippet of some of the strategies and solutions that you help people with. And it's like, you know, this isn't rocket science, right? When I say it, but it's just that benefit of having someone to bounce it off of, someone that you trust that's not going to hold you in judgment, someone you don't have to worry they're going to go back and tell Sally over here that I'm working on this issue and I'm going to be exposed to someone that doesn't have it all together. And so I do put a value in the coaching process, because I do feel like that's a safe container or a space that people can have to kind of be transparent about where they're struggling or where they may be getting stuck, and then finding real-time solutions that are going to be able to help them overcome those gaps. What do you think, Amy?
You triggered another thought for me that that I'd like to explore, if you don't mind.
Okay, so look, this is a perfect time. I'm going to segue us, because I'm going to have Amy back. I know that you guys say, why should she do that? Because this is just too much to give y'all, too much. We got to come back and do another episode. I really believe we have to come back so that we don't have to rush our point and we have time to talk about it. So today's episode is going to end here. We ended on solutions. We've helped you identify, explain what imposter syndrome is. We talked about how you can be more visible in the workplace and be able to gain that respect that you believe that you deserve, and how you can start having more control over your career rather than feeling like you're being driven by your career. So this time has gone by so quickly. I just want to thank you again, Amy, for being here. And can you tell folks that are listening where they can find you?
Sure, yes. So my company is called Swim Against the Current, and my website is www.swim-against.com. Or if you just type in swimagainstthecurrent.com, you'll land there too.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for being here. So she's going to come back. So you guys make sure that you listen to that next episode, okay? My name is Dr. Sanchez, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining the conversation. Remember to subscribe, share, and join us next time.